as early as 1943. We've still got that idea we talked about earlier. Light tanks, we're now doing that with wheeled on, we're kissing our David Arnold car. We're looking at cruiser tanks still. And the A41, or semi-powered Centurion, is called a heavy cruiser. We've pretty much given up on the idea of an infantry tank. But at the same time as they order the Centurion, they order a tank called the A45. We forget about that one. It's going to be a bigger, heavily more armoured vehicle that we're going to use alongside the Centurion. Centurion is ready in its first model. It's got lots of innovation on it. It's ready to go in May of 1945. And of course it misses the end of the war by about a couple of weeks. Operation Sentry takes place where we take some of these first early model Centurions. They've got different armament arrangements. We take them out to Germany, they miss the end of the fighting. We test them till July 1945 and then bring them back. We realise with the Centurion there's a good combination there. We've got that famous Meteor engine, what I talked about earlier, the Merlin engine. 600 horsepower, we uprate that in its service line, so plenty of oomph to drive that vehicle around. We get rid of the bow machine gun that we can see in all those earlier World War II British vehicles, the Beza. These are 90-degree plates, that's why we have that set front on things like the Comet, the Churchill, etc. We now have a lovely sloped glacé plate on the front. Better, as was mentioned earlier, it thickens the amount of armour, an anti-tank round going parallel to the ground, a horizontal approach. It's got more armour to penetrate, and you might get a deflection, of course, as well. We designed the A41 Centurion. Part of its remit, we might have a bigger gun coming. The very first Centurions had a 17-pounder, you can see one in our World War II display. 17-pounder gun, the one we put on the far side, cracking gun, very good ammunition. We end up realising 20-pounders on its way. Let's build a tank we can upgrade the firepower. So again, we've got new things going on there. They're thinking ahead. And all in all, that combination, when it comes together with a bit of fencing, turns out to be the Centurion that many blokes in the audience might be thinking, it's a classic looking tank. So we are very pleased today because we've got a range of Centurions coming on, and one of the early ones here comes from the Royal Netherlands Army. They turn up pretty much every year with bringing something from their box department. We're really pleased to have them here again. And they bought one of the Dutch Army Centurions. Again, lots of countries in Europe that were allowed to sell the Centurion in the 1950s end up equipping their army, which is undoubtedly was the best tank in the world at the time. Just what we were saying about the other. Now in 1950 the Korean War started and Britain was at the point we were trying to raise money, we were a bankrupt nation after World War II, selling tanks as a way of raising money. Unfortunately the country's queuing up to buy the Centurion. We're going to see a Swiss Centurion a little bit later on. Unfortunately what happens is because of the Korean War, we now need all our tanks for ourselves or for our immediate allies. So some countries, such as Switzerland, who ordered their Centurions in 1950, they don't get them until 1955. The Dutch start with a small order of Centurion. They're a NATO ally, that's good for us. We can supply them over and above people like the Swiss, who aren't a NATO ally at the time. So here they buy and they upgrade. Every country that buys a Centurion does a little bit of difference to it. So we can see on this one the spare wheel come off the back of the turret there. The the searchlight, different countries at different times, white searchlights or sometimes infrared. White light for illuminating the battlefield, infrared if you've got infrared systems that can detect the light coming back. Now this Dutch Army Centurion did not get the gun upgrade. Some tanks later on, this is still not the 20-pound gun, later tanks will see, if you have a look, you'll see those subtle differences between the different countries and those different tank guns. Now, one of the other things going on in the background, at the same time as we're building the Centurion, we have a worry in the West that the Russians have got their JS3 tanks in service. When Stalin dies in, I think it was 51, 52, they changed the title of those JS3 tanks, and heavy Russian tanks, 122mm gun, they changed the title to T10. Stalin gets forgotten about quickly. We are worried, we've seen a T10 tank. What's coming next? We think the Russians are going to be building even bigger tanks. So in the background we start heavier tank programs. One leads to the Conqueror tank that goes into service in 1955 with a 120mm gun on it. What if that gun's not enough as well? We might need a 180mm, I think. Big enough gun to knock out the future Soviet heavy tanks. So this is why we end up with this piece coming on now, FV4005. It's really a test vehicle for that gun. A 183mm gun, the biggest gun ever fitted on a tank for direct fire roll. FV4005, it goes through a couple of iterations. They start by trying to design an assisted loading system because the rounds of this are so big. They have to break them down anyway, the projectile first, and then you load in the case with all the propellants that's going to blast that round out the end of the barrel. They start by trying to come up with a sort of assisted loader system. It looked like an auto loader, it actually wasn't. And then there's this worry, what if there's an attack from Russia? What if the threat from the Warsaw Pact comes sooner than we expect? So they come up with this second iteration. We might have been able to build these in a hurry should the threat start emerging quicker than we wanted it to. Hence, this is the second iteration of the vehicle with that cab on the top, that turret system there. They've got it to the point they can angle that gun about 45 degrees either side of the centre line so that it won't go fire sideways, because even with, you can see on the back there, they've got a ground anchor to anchor it into the ground. If you turn the gun 90 degrees, so much pressure you'll probably turn the tank over. About 80 tons of back blast they measure it as every time that gun fires. This one will have two loaders in the back. You pick up the rocket right round, they're firing what they call X-rounds, high explosive squash head. It's a round that's full of basically plastic explosive. It pancakes against the enemy vehicle and then detonates and sends a shockwave through the armour. They fire about 500 rounds from this vehicle and test it, so it's proven. But unfortunately, the rate of fire, you can really, even on a good day, only get about 2 rounds a minute off of this because of the time it takes to load. 1955, they stopped the programme. And the reason for that is 2 different reasons. One, in the background, it emerges that Khrushchev, now the Russian president, or in charge basically, he doesn't like heavy tanks. He stopped the Russian heavy tank program. And the second reason, the key reason, is now we can get anti-tank missiles to do the same job at distance and with greater penetration and accuracy than firing this, the 183mm gun with its huge red rounds. One of the problems of the rounds, they're so big, and head rounds tend to be a bit slow through the air because it's like firing a dustbin. Those rounds can be blown off target out to about 2,000 metres away, etc. So they're not too sure if this is the best way to go. And missiles tend to take over, or we end up, as we find out as we look at the Centurion story, there's perhaps other ways we can develop our tank guns. But that FV4005, some of you here may have helped towards its restoration. The guys right into the team that helped put that one back together again, so it's really good for us to be able to see it here. And we've got a vehicle that, to put it bluntly, that turret used to be in our play area many years ago. No one interested because it appeared in the World of Tanks game, because everyone starts learning about it. Now we've got it back into a running order, so quite an achievement there for the guys that actually have managed to get that running. They've added the gun truck on the front that was missing for many years, and if you look at the back, there's that ground anchor. If it was going to fire, you drop the anchor behind you. That gave you a sense of solidity, so the vehicle wouldn't actually go back too far when the guns fired from it. The hull underneath, think of it only as a donor. What they did, they tested the vehicle on, I think it's Mark III and Mark V Centurion hulls. Whether that was going to be into production, it's a way we could carry that gun. But like many of these post-war projects, they're going on in parallel. Just as the gun fitted here, didn't mean to say they thought in the end we would go on the same type of vehicle. So we have some of that other Centurion family. The point I was making earlier, 17-pounder, 20-pounder on the Dutch Army one. In 1956, in the Hungarian uprising, a T-54A was driven into the British Embassy compound in Budapest. We measured the armour thickness on that T-54, and that worried Britain because we didn't think the 20-pounder would penetrate the T-54. So we started a program to make a new gun. Now that new gun is designed at Fort Halstead in Kent. It becomes something called the L7105 gun, and we can see it on a couple more of the Centurions here. It's a fantastic bit of kit because what happens is it's so effective that it makes things like the 120 gun on Conqueror, the big heavy tank we made, makes it redundant overnight. And when it goes into service on the Centurion, we retired the Conqueror tank in 1965. Not needed anymore. It's a very accurate gun. They can fire 3 8 rounds from the 105 gun within 20 seconds, and that's much quicker than most other tanks. If you're putting together a tank in your own country, you want the 105 gun and goes on the level of one, but it ends up going on the first aid with your tank. It's a very effective gun all round. 35,000 tanks around the world are made with the L7-105 gun. And I would argue the most famous one, of course, is the Centurion. About 8,000 Centurions made in the UK, half of them exported to other armies. And we've also got here with us, we've got a Swedish army with that jazzy camouflage scheme. That again is a late upgraded version of the Centurion. Sweden, they put a diesel engine, Continental diesel in the back. They add extra armour, reactive armour on it. They really make a difference to that tank, but it still carries on improving. Start by getting Mark 1 and Mark 2 Centurions, take the turret off, roll the cab on the top. This is the Mark 2 version of the ARV, much more structured. The whole idea is, we looked earlier at some of the other recovery variants, the whole idea is that if you break down on the battlefield, if you go over a mine and you bust the track, you need to have armoured recovery because there may still be things flying around on the battlefield. Why the Germans lost a lot of their heavy armour earlier on in the war is because they didn't have an armoured recovery vehicle until they got the bird factor into service. You turn up with a big recovery truck and there's still bullet, shell fire, you're in trouble. Hence the ARV. And with the ARV we made over a couple of hundred in the UK. Again, you need something of an equivalent weight and size to be able to manoeuvre and tow a down tank. And there's a winch in there that, of course, they can double up the winch kit so they can winch bits and pieces out or do tows on the rear of the vehicle to recover a down vehicle. In British Army service, the Centurion as a gun tank went on through 13 different marks, lots of improvements, better armour protection when we realised the Soviets had got those bigger guns like on the T-54, 100mm. We end up improving the amount of fuel it can carry. One of the weaknesses of the Centurion is very thirsty early in its life. They did a mono trailer, you can see one in the building. Have an armoured trailer carrying behind you that carries fuel. Didn't really work the way we wanted it to. I kid you not, was given to us because the chief of the defence staff, the British Army, met the Swedes. At the end of the official visit, he handed over the embossed ashtray, and the Swedes, the Portugal, basically threw back the keys to this tank and said, would you like one of your tank back? So that's why this particular Swedish tank came all the way down back to the tank museum after all its upgrade. They run out of service in about 2000 with the Swedish Army there. And a lovely example of a British version of the Centurion, the 105 gun on there. And in the back, we go back to that still that meteor engine upgraded to give it a little more well there. The Centurion, as I mentioned, great success story. It helped put Britain's tanks back on the world map, but it's still going on. The Israelis have amazingly still lots of Centurion hulls they're using in different roles. And if you go to South Africa, they've still got the Centurion in service. It's called the Olive Mount. It doesn't look the same, they've added different armour around the outside. So it's one of those tank stories that fills the gap. But as we go back to it, as I said earlier, great World War II tank that doesn't see action in World War II. But for the next 20 years, one of the best tanks in service all around the world. Sees action in the Korean War, makes its name there. That's why lots of people want to buy it. It sees action in Vietnam with the Australian forces. It sees action in the Indo-Pakistan War of 1965. More modern American tanks go out to fight the Indian Centurions. They're absolutely creamed by the Indian crews because the Indians have been trained at Lulworth. They can fire 3 rounds quickly. The more they can get 3 rounds off before the tanks can even fire back. So it's also about the training of the crews. So as our last Centurion leaves the arena, you probably heard or you followed, we were hoping to get jazz through here from our friends in Brussels. Again, that sadly broke down. We're lucky, and one of the crews here, they also broke down on the motorway. It was their towing wagon, the Dutch Army. But they've all made a real effort so that we see one of the best displays ever of Centurions I've ever likely to see as well. So give them a round of applause. They did rather well getting all that picture. So thank you. And if I can, you now back to Steve.
Thank you, David. Round of applause to David Willingworth. That amazing fact of knowledge he is. So there's still another tank to talk about.
To me, but there we go, we're still having our little recovery period. Probably a bit disappointed that nothing actually broke down during the course of our display. You may recall that we've actually got one of the Centurions always breaks down on this corner, which is why I was a bit suspicious when there's one stopped there earlier on, but we didn't have to actually recover it. Serving in Europe with NATO countries, mainly back then West Germany. West Germany was fed up with its roads getting ripped up by tanks turning corners or tarmac on a warm day. So they asked that all tanks and all British Army vehicles had to be road legal. They put rubber pads on. They call that hush puppy track after the coup. So That you'll see on different vehicles going around the place. All modern British Army vehicles now, they have to be road legal, and that means rubber track. It's nothing about grip or anything that way.